Welcome aboard. Let me start by telling you what you've signed up for. This playlist is a complete preparation journey for the IAPP's CIPP/E exam, which is widely considered the gold standard certification for European data protection. If you're a privacy analyst, a lawyer, an auditor, or someone pivoting into privacy, you're in exactly the right place. Now, you might be wondering, do I need a legal background for this? Honest answer, no. When I first started working in privacy, I remember opening the GDPR and feeling completely lost in the legal jargon. That experience shaped how I teach. In this course, we take every concept, break it down into plain language, and anchor it with real-life examples, actual enforcement cases, and stories from consulting projects. Everything you'll see here is aligned to the current CIPP/E body of knowledge published by the IAPP. So you can trust that we're covering what the exam actually tests across all 5 domains. Nothing more, nothing less. Think of me as your guide sitting across the table from you, not a textbook reading itself out loud. We'll ask questions, challenge assumptions, and by the end, the GDPR will feel less like a legal maze and more like a logical system. Sound good? Let's talk about how to use this playlist effectively. Let me give you the roadmap, because how you watch this playlist genuinely affects how much you retain. We have 19 chapters, and they're deliberately sequenced like a story. We start with history and institutions, move into core concepts like personal data and lawful processing, then build up to security, data subject rights, international transfers, accountability, and finally, real-world compliance areas like marketing, workplace privacy, and AI. Here's my honest advice. Resist the temptation to jump straight to the topic that scares you most, usually international transfers. Why? Because each chapter assumes you've absorbed the one before it. Imagine trying to understand the Schrems rulings without first knowing what the Court of Justice is or what adequacy means. It's like watching the final season of a series first. Technically possible, but you'll miss why everything matters. Each video ends with clear takeaways, and I'd suggest a simple routine. Watch a chapter, jot down 3 things you learned, and test yourself with practice questions before moving on. Spaced repetition beats cramming every single time. One more thing, keep a notebook or document handy for article numbers. The exam won't ask you to recite them, but knowing that breach notification lives in Article 33 helps you organize your thinking. Alright, roadmap done. Let's step back into history. Let me ask you something. Why do you think Europe, more than almost anywhere else in the world, treats privacy as a fundamental right rather than just a consumer issue? The answer lies in living memory. During the Second World War, occupying regimes used something as innocent as municipal population registers to identify and persecute people based on religion and ethnicity. Think about that. A simple record of names, addresses, and religions collected for administrative purposes became a tool for atrocity. The data itself wasn't evil, but in the wrong hands, it was devastating. When the war ended, Europe drew a profound lesson. Protecting people means protecting information about people. Human dignity, private life, and freedom from state intrusion became cornerstones of the new European order. Privacy wasn't framed as a luxury or a preference. It was framed as a precondition for democracy itself. Here's why this matters for your exam and your career. Every time you see the GDPR make a seemingly strict demand, like requiring a legal basis before processing, remember, it flows from this rationale. The European mindset is simple. Never again should personal data enable harm on that scale. When I explain this history to clients who complain the GDPR is too strict, the strictness suddenly makes sense to them. Keep this story in mind as we move forward. So Europe had the motivation to protect privacy. But what turned that motivation into actual legislation? In one word, computers. Picture the late 1960s. Governments and large companies started buying mainframe computers, machines that could store, sort, and match millions of records in seconds. Suddenly, tasks that once took an army of clerks flipping through paper files could be done instantly. Now here's the question people started asking. If the government can combine my tax records, health records, and travel history at the push of a button, who's watching the watchers? Public anxiety grew around proposals for national data banks, centralized databases holding everything about every citizen. People feared secret profiles, decisions made about them without their knowledge, and losing control over their own information. Sound familiar? These are exactly the anxieties we have about big tech and AI today. History rhymes. The response came quickly. The German state of Hesse passed the world's first data protection law in 1970, and Sweden followed with the first national law in 1973. Notice the pattern here because it repeats throughout this course. New technology creates new risk, and new risk triggers new regulation. The GDPR, the e-privacy rules, the AI Act, they're all chapters in this same ongoing story. Let's now look at the human rights layer beneath it all. Let's build the legal foundation, layer by layer. Think of this as the constitutional bedrock that everything else, including the GDPR, stands on. The first layer came in 1948 with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 12 declared that no one should be subjected to arbitrary interference with their privacy, family, home, or correspondence. It was a moral statement to the world, though not directly enforceable. 2 years later, Europe went further. The European Convention on Human Rights, in its Article 8, created an enforceable right to respect for private and family life. Enforceable is the key word here. Individuals could actually bring cases against states. Then in 1966, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights extended privacy protection globally as binding treaty law. But here's the development I want you to remember most. The EU Charter of Fundamental Rights did something unique. In Article 7, it protects private life, and in Article 8, separately, it protects personal data. Europe is the only place in the world where data protection stands as its own distinct fundamental right, not just a subset of privacy. Why does that distinction matter? Because it gives data protection constitutional muscle. When the Court of Justice struck down entire transfer frameworks in the Schrems cases, which we'll cover later, it was enforcing this charter. Remember these four instruments. They appear on the exam. Now let's talk about a document that quietly shaped nearly every privacy law on the planet, the OECD Privacy Guidelines of 1980. Here's the context. By the late 70s, countries were passing their own privacy laws, and businesses started worrying. If every country has different rules, how does data flow across borders for trade? The OECD, an organization focused on economic cooperation, stepped in with a clever solution. Agree on common privacy principles so that data can move freely between countries that respect them. Notice the dual goal: protect privacy and enable data flows. That same balancing act sits at the heart of the GDPR today. The guidelines set out 8 principles, things like collection limitation, purpose specification, data quality, security safeguards, openness, and accountability. Do those sound familiar? They should. Read Article 5 of the GDPR and you'll find these very principles refined and made enforceable. When I train corporate teams, I often show the 1980 text next to the GDPR, and people are amazed at how little the core ideas have changed. Now, the guidelines were voluntary, not binding, which was their weakness. In 2013, the OECD revised them to add modern concepts like risk management, breach notification, and privacy management programs. So here's your takeaway. The OECD gave the world its shared privacy vocabulary. Next, we'll see who made those ideas legally binding. If the OECD guidelines were the world's privacy vocabulary, Convention 108 was the first time anyone put that vocabulary into a binding contract between nations. Adopted by the Council of Europe in 1981, Convention 108 became the first legally binding international treaty on data protection. Let that sink in. Before the EU had any data protection directive, this treaty already required signatory states to ensure personal data was collected fairly, used for specified purposes, kept accurate and secure, and accessible to the individuals concerned. It even gave special protection to sensitive data like health and religious beliefs. Here's a detail that surprises many of my students. Convention 108 isn't limited to Europe. It's open to any country in the world, and nations from Latin America and Africa have joined. That's why we call it a global reference standard. Think of it as a club with clear membership rules, where joining signals to the world that your country takes data protection seriously. Of course, 1981 technology looks nothing like today's. So in 2018, the treaty was modernized as Convention 108+, adding breach notification, stronger transparency, and requirements for independent data protection authorities. For your exam, remember this sequence. Convention 108 inspired the EU's Directive of 95, which in turn evolved into the GDPR. It's one continuous family tree, and we're about to meet the next generation. Let's connect the dots and finish our history with a question. If European countries all had privacy laws by the 90s, why wasn't that enough? Imagine you're running a company in that era, operating in Germany, France, and Italy. Each country implemented privacy rules differently. Different registration duties, different definitions, different regulators. Moving customer data between your own offices felt like crossing legal minefields. This fragmentation clashed directly with the whole point of the EU, a single market where goods, services, and yes, data flow freely. The first fix was the Data Protection Directive of 1995. It harmonized the principles, but a directive requires each country to write its own national version, and 28 versions meant 28 flavors of privacy law. Better, but still messy. Then came a pivotal moment. The Treaty of Lisbon in 2009 wrote data protection directly into EU treaty law through Article 16, giving the EU explicit power to legislate. That opened the door to the GDPR, a regulation that applies identically everywhere, no national translation needed. And then, Brexit reminded everyone that harmonization is never guaranteed. The UK kept its own copy, the UK GDPR, and the EU granted it adequacy, but with a sunset clause and ongoing scrutiny. So here's the thought I'll leave you with. Harmonization is a living project, not a finished one. Next chapter, we meet the institutions that keep it alive. Fantastic work finishing the first chapter. You now understand something many privacy professionals skip, the why behind European data protection. Trust me, that foundation will make every chapter ahead easier to digest. Before you jump to the next video, let me take 30 seconds to help you get the most from this journey. First, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Subscribing gives you access to this entire playlist, plus all our other certification playlists covering privacy, AI governance, and cybersecurity. New videos land regularly, and you don't want to miss them. Second, watch this playlist in order. I know it's tempting to skip around, but we've designed the sequence deliberately. Each chapter builds on the last, just like the history we covered today built layer upon layer. And third, if you want a more structured preparation experience, check out our full CIPP/E course on Udemy. Along with these lessons, you'll get chapter quizzes, full-length practice tests, role-play scenarios, and downloadable study materials that simulate the real exam experience. The link is in the description below. Alright, that's it for Chapter 1. Grab a coffee, take a short break if you need one, and I'll see you in Chapter 2, where we meet the institutions that actually run European data protection. See you there.